My name is Ashley, and at the age of 32, I have spent the last 10 years methodically and tirelessly building a career as a manager at Preston and Associates, while my younger sisters Sarah and Emma, completely absorbed in family life, managed to get married, have children, and seem to find the harmony that I might have missed. Immersed in the work. Don't get me wrong, I really love my profession. I'm proud of my achievements. I feel satisfaction from every successfully implemented project. But from time to time an uncomfortable thought creeps into my head. Did I miss something important? Did I miss the chance for something more than just a corner office on the 23rd floor with a panoramic view of the city, which at night twinkles with thousands of lights? These questions come rarely and for a short time, because my schedule is so busy that I have almost no time to think about my own life. Just like on that typical Tuesday morning, when my phone rang and I glanced at the screen and saw Sarah's name. At the same time, I was automatically sorting through a stack of reports, sorting papers by urgency, calculating in my mind which tasks needed to be completed before lunch so as not to stay in the office until midnight. "Hey, Ash." My sister's clear, cheerful voice chirped over the speaker, and I automatically smiled, despite the fact that Sarah and I were 6 years apart and our personalities were completely different. Her calls always brought a sense of something warm and family, even if the conversation was about trifles. "Hi, Sarah," I replied, looking at the quarterly numbers at the same time. "How are you?" "Great, I just want to discuss something important." My sister's voice took on a slightly conspiratorial tone, and I instinctively put the papers aside. "You do remember that Mom turns 60 in 2 months, don't you?" Of course I remembered. But until Sarah reminded me of this out loud, the date of her birthday remained somewhere in the back of my mind, lost among the endless list of work meetings, deadlines, and urgent tasks. "Yes, of course," I replied, feeling a slight unease begin to form inside, because I had a premonition that something was about to be asked of me. "We all want to do something special," Sarah continued, "so we met, discussed it, and decided that the best gift would be a week at the Mountain Pine Resort, with the whole family. We have already organized everything. It remains only to make our contribution." It sounded so casual, but when my sister named the amount, I almost choked on my coffee. "How much?" I asked, making sure that I had misheard. That was more than I spent on my last vacation, which, come to think of it, was 3 years ago. "I know it's a lot," Sarah hastened to add, "but it's for Mom, you know." No, it's okay," I muttered, already opening the banking application. "I'll transfer it right now." "Great." "Oh, and one more thing," my sister paused, and I tensed involuntarily. "Make sure you take a vacation during this time. Don't plan anything else, okay?" The next few weeks flew by in a blur of work meetings, endless emails, contract revisions, and sudden meetings, and although from time to time I thought about the upcoming family vacation, I was more interested in what exactly my sisters decided to do for my mom's anniversary. But every time I asked this question, the answer was so vague that I just waved my hand, confident that everything would be fine. After all, I had a job, and all these details could wait. And so it was Saturday night dinner, the one that traditionally gathered the whole family at the big oak table in our parents' house. As always, the aroma of baked meat and fresh bread floated in the living room. My father retold his old jokes, which he had heard 1,000 times, but nevertheless everyone continued to laugh. My mother fussed, pouring drinks for everyone, and Aunt Susan argued with her cousins about politics. Everything went on as usual, until Sarah, deliberately casually pushing peas around her plate with a fork, dropped her small but weighty bomb. "So," she said without looking up, "we finally agreed on everything about Mom's birthday." "Yes?" I set down my glass of wine and raised an eyebrow, waiting to see what would happen next. "We're all going to spend a week at the Mountain Pine Resort." An excited chatter instantly rang out at the table. My mother was beaming with happiness. My father was already enthusiastically telling me which trails he wanted to master, and my sisters were vying to discuss equipment and the level of difficulty of the slopes. Everything seemed so joyful and carefree, until I had the feeling that I had missed something. "Wait," I raised my hand, drawing attention. Why didn't anyone tell me about this before? I don't even have a ski suit, and I don't have time to buy one anymore. The room suddenly became too quiet. Too much. Mom cleared her throat, and I felt something warm clench uncomfortably inside, because I knew this tone in advance. I knew that a request would follow that I simply could not refuse. Darling, she began softly, we all really hope that you will do us a big favor. I swallowed. And you'll look after the kids while we're there. I stared at my family gathered at the dining table, waiting for someone to laugh and say that this was all a joke, ridiculous, stupid, perhaps even a little cruel, but a joke. But the silence dragged on. No one said a word, breaking the silence only with the soft clink of cutlery touching plates and the muffled crackle of wood in the fireplace. Do you want me to look after the kids? I finally managed, feeling my own voice sound strained, as if the words were coming out through thick, sticky cotton. Well, yes, Sarah replied serenely, shrugging her shoulders, as if it were something completely insignificant, self-evident, something that wasn't even worth discussing. All 5 of them? My mind automatically started counting them, as if trying to find at least some logical formula in this mathematics to explain what was happening. Emma's baby, Jason, who is not even 2 years old yet. Lucy is Sarah's daughter, a spoiled, noisy, but charming 4-year-old. Michael's twins, Tom and Anna, are real little hurricanes who recently turned 6, and finally Rachel's son, Pete, a shy 7-year-old boy who looked at the world with sad eyes. 5 children under the age of 7. 5 of them. Well, you treat them so well, Mom said with a smile, as if that explained everything, as if that was enough to justify the fact that I was simply cut off from my family vacation and turned into a free babysitter. They love their Aunt Ashley. I looked around the table again, still hoping for a hint of humor on someone's face, for someone to roll their eyes and say, "Come on, of course it was a joke, Ashley, relax." But no, everyone was looking at me with the same expectant expression, waiting for my usual, habitual, yes, my tacit consent, my obedient acceptance of their decision, made without my participation. But that's not fair, my voice cracked, and I balled my hands into fists under the table, trying to control the rising tide of anger. I also want to celebrate with you. It's Mom's birthday. Emma, my 28-year-old sister, put her fork down on the edge of her plate with a soft sigh and looked at me with an expression that mixed patience and slight fatigue, as if I were a moody child who refuses to understand the obvious things. "Come on, Ashley, you're going to be bored there anyway," she said, cocking her head to one side. "It will be noisy, crowded, fuss, snow, icy wind. You don't like all this stuff." "Boring?" I asked, feeling something inside me stretching to the limit, a thin thread of patience threatening to snap. "Are you sure? Maybe I'd have fun." Emma exchanged a quick glance with Sarah, and I felt a pang of annoyance at their tacit agreement, at their confidence that they knew me better than I did myself. "You're doing great with kids," Sarah shrugged. "They adore you. And let's be honest." She hesitated, and I immediately realized that something unpleasant was about to follow. "What?" My voice sounded tougher than I'd planned. "It's not like you need a break from family life," she finally finished, and her words hung heavy in the air. I felt something tighten in my chest, something dark and painful that made me want to turn away, close myself off, protect myself. But before I could respond, Emma intervened, and her voice sounded deliberately light, almost cheerful. "She just means," she said, smiling with that condescending expression that had infuriated me since I was a kid, "that you don't have kids or a husband to run away from the rest of us. We need this vacation, you know." I blinked, and the green beans on my plate suddenly blurred before my eyes. "I won't let them see me cry. I won't let them get that satisfaction." Instead, I slowly, without further ado, pushed back my chair and stood up. "Ashley," my mom's voice sounded a little worried, but not enough to stop me. I turned around, went to the counter, grabbed my purse, feeling a hurricane of emotions rising inside: anger, resentment, disappointment, and headed for the door without saying a word. No one stopped me. No one even called out. Just my mom's voice, coming from the dining room as I was crossing the hallway. "Don't worry, she'll be a little offended at first, but then she'll change her mind." As always. I left the house, and the warm evening air blew over my face, helping to clear my head, but the feeling of emptiness did not disappear, but only intensified. I could hear the conversation at the table behind me coming back to life, as they were already discussing ski slopes, equipment, and looking forward to having fun, as if I wasn't even there, as if my feelings didn't matter at all. For 10 years, I was reliable, responsible, always helpful, always putting other people's needs above my own, sacrificing my time, my days off, and my plans for them. And that's what I got in return. But the worst part wasn't even that they asked me to look after the kids. And how easily, how casually they did it, as a matter of course. It's like I'm not human. It's just a resource. Memories came flooding back to me with such force that I involuntarily squeezed my eyes shut, allowing them to overwhelm my mind. Each of them, which previously seemed to be just a part of family life, now acquired a new, darker meaning in the light of today's events, tinged with shades of resentment and awareness that I had been pushing away from myself for so long. When I was 16, I was cooking dinner for the whole family while my mom was sitting with Emma, helping her sort out complex math problems, and then it seemed to me that it was natural to help, to be useful, to take on some responsibility, because I'm the older sister. I was 18, and I turned down a trip with friends for spring break because my parents decided to leave for the weekend, and Sarah was still too young to be alone, and of course no one even asked if I had other plans. At 21, juggling 2 jobs while in college, I saved money to buy Emma a prom dress because she dreamed of it, and Mom said it was too expensive, and I couldn't bear the disappointment in my sister's eyes. Victim after victim. "Ashley, can you look after Jason for a few hours?" Emma's voice echoed in my head, and it took me a moment to realize that it wasn't a memory, but just an echo of too many requests that had become habitual, repetitive, predictable. "I really need a break," Sarah said, irritably brushing her hair off her face when I came to pick Lucy up after work, tired, but of course she silently agreed, because it was impossible to refuse. "Ashley, could you pick up the twins for the weekend?" Michael's familiar request sounded like a broken record, because I always said yes, always, even if I had an important meeting the next day, even if I was exhausted to the limit. "Rachel is overwhelmed by Pete, and you're so good with kids." I prided myself on being reliable, responsible, the perfect daughter. But when I collapsed on the sofa, feeling the cold skin of the furniture touching my hot face, fatigue covered me with a new, unusual force, because suddenly I realized that in fact no one had ever wondered if I wanted to be like this. My gaze fell on the photo albums stacked haphazardly on the coffee table, thick, heavy, filled with memories. I slowly picked up one of them, flipped through the pages: family trips, holidays, celebrations, faces laughing at the camera. But I've never been in the middle of these shots. I was behind the camera, capturing moments that would forever remain with them, but not with me. I was in the kitchen while the others were sitting in the living room. I was clearing the plates while everyone was drinking wine and discussing the news. When was the last time someone asked me what I wanted? It's not like you need a break from family life. Sarah's words continued to ring in my head, causing something inside to shrink, squeeze into a tight ball, because if you follow her logic, it means that my life, my career, my successes, my decisions, were not sufficient grounds to be considered important, meaningful, necessary. It was as if I was just an auxiliary part in the family mechanism, not a person with my own desires and dreams, but a resource that could be used. I couldn't sleep that night, and as I tossed and turned in bed, I replayed over and over in my head the moments that I now saw differently: how I worked in college so as not to ask my parents for money, how I immediately found a job after graduation to help Emma and Sarah finish their studies, how I sent money home when my parents had difficulties, because it's natural, It's my family. But now, looking back, I couldn't help but wonder if anyone had ever done something like this for me. By morning, I had come to a decision. I am not a conflicted person. I've never been there. But I couldn't just say yes again and let them make that choice for me. So I decided to do what I've always done best, find a solution that suits everyone. I waited a reasonable hour on Sunday morning before I dialed my mom's number. She answered on the third ring. "Hi, Mom," I tried to keep my voice level and calm. "I was thinking about going to the resort." "Oh, dear, we were just discussing what things to take with you, your father." "Actually, I have a solution," I interrupted before she could start talking about the details again that had nothing to do with me. "I will pay for a professional babysitter for all 5 children so that everyone can enjoy the holiday together." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for a moment. A moment too long. "This isn't going to work, Ashley," Mom finally said, and her voice was strained, as if I'd suggested something outrageous. "Why not?" I asked politely, even though I already knew the answer inside. "We can't entrust the children to some stranger. They're used to you." "Mom, I want to be a part of the celebration too," I tried to explain so that she would understand that it was important to me. "I want to be there for your birthday. I could find a really good babysitter, with excellent references." "You're not exactly a sociable butterfly," she cut me off in a sharp, slightly irritated tone. I froze. "What?" "I just mean that you're probably going to be uncomfortable with all the noise and fuss," she continued, as if explaining the obvious. "In any case, the kids will keep you busy and you will enjoy spending time with them. It's perfect for everyone. For everyone. Except for me." The click of the end of the call echoed in my ear before I could answer, like the end of a conversation in which I wasn't even given the opportunity to express my point of view, and I sat there, still holding the phone to my ear, while the meaning of my mother's words slowly penetrated my mind, filling it with an unpleasant mixture. Bitterness, disappointment, and the realization that for her this conversation was already over, the discussion was over, the decision had been made, and my opinion in this decision did not matter at all. She didn't even bother to say goodbye. I was still staring at the screen, automatically flipping through recent calls, when the phone vibrated in my hand, and Sarah's name appeared on the display again. "How dare you?" she hissed, without even giving me time to say hello, her voice ringing with indignation, and I reflexively straightened up, amazed by the force of her anger, as if I had really done something monstrous that deserved such a reaction. "Mom just told me about your little offer to hire a babysitter. You're trying to ruin everything." I blinked, not immediately realizing the meaning of her words, but then irritation flared up in my chest, hot and sharp, because it seemed to me that I was still speaking the language of logic, while my family stubbornly insisted on their own, completely different, where reality bent in their favor, adjusted to their desires. "Ruin it?" I repeated, trying to keep my voice calm, but my voice trembled with tension anyway. "Sarah, I'm trying to find a solution that suits everyone." "We already have a solution," she snapped, and I could almost imagine her rolling her eyes, the way she always does when she thinks a conversation is pointless. "It's all planned, Ashley. All. And now you're being completely selfish, trying to change our arrangements at the last minute." The accusation hit me like a slap in the face, unexpected, deafening, and harsh. "Selfish?" I asked, feeling something inside me pull dangerously, like a taut string about to snap. "Yes," she exclaimed, and there was genuine indignation in her voice, as if she really couldn't believe that I dared to disagree with their plan. "We've been planning this for weeks. Everyone is excited. The resort is booked, the events are planned, and now you want to ruin everything because you can't just do one thing for the sake of the family." My hand started to shake slightly, and I tightened my grip on the phone, trying to keep from snapping, yelling, and throwing out everything that had accumulated, because what's the point if they don't even want to listen? "One thing?" I asked slowly, savoring those words, feeling the bitter taste of years of accumulated resentment rise to my tongue. Are you serious? You know, her voice dropped, and there was something steely, cold, and unshakable in it. If you ruin this trip for everyone, if you ruin Mom's birthday, don't worry about talking to me anymore. I'm serious, Ashley. The line broke. I sat motionless, stunned by the threat of my own younger sister, the one I once held in my arms, comforting after a failed school play, the one for whom I changed my plans to help, the one for whom I once refused to travel with friends because my mother asked to look after her. My phone vibrated again. Message. Family should stick together. I blinked slowly, feeling a tension building up inside, unlike any emotion I had experienced before. We all help each other. Is another message. Do you remember how I watered your flowers last year while you were at that conference? One more thing. You get along well with children, they love you. Why can't you just forget about being touchy and think about what's best for the family? My fingers started typing the answer quickly on their own, and there wasn't a drop of doubt in the words I sent, nor there are no shadows of the old softness, no trace of a desire to smooth out the corners, only the truth, such as they may not want to accept. A real family doesn't use each other. A real family respects each other's wishes and includes everyone in their plans. A real family doesn't manipulate or cause guilt. I watched as 3 small dots appeared on the screen, indicating that Sarah was typing an answer, but then they disappeared. Then they reappeared. Then they disappeared again. There was no response. And that's when it hit me. How they asked for money without explaining exactly what they were needed for. How carefully they told me to take time off from work, without mentioning why. How casually, informally they announced their plans at dinner, when everything had already been decided, as if there was no point in discussing it. They'd been planning all this time. So far, I've been staying in the office until night, completing projects to ensure my financial stability. While I was picking up children from kindergartens and schools, I helped with lessons, and sat with them on weekends. So far, I've been a comfortable, perfect daughter and a sister who always said yes. They secretly organized the trip using my money, planning my time, assigning responsibilities, as if my participation was a settled matter, as if I had no right to refuse. And now that I wasn't playing according to their script, they tried everything, threats, guilt, emotional blackmail, to force me back into the box they had created for me. Something strange happens when you finally see through the fog of manipulation. Everything suddenly becomes crystal clear. I felt lighter than I had ever felt in recent years, as if the weight that had been weighing on my shoulders was gradually disappearing into thin air, leaving behind not an emptiness, but something new, fresh, pulsating with energy and steadfastness. The guilt that had weighed on me for years was replaced by something completely different: determination, as hard as a smooth stone that finally stops crumbling under constant pressure. I opened my laptop and started looking for options for the trip. For an hour, while my fingers were running over the keyboard, comparing hotels, tickets, and routes, I was piecing together my own freedom, filling in the gaps in my life with what I had always lacked. In the end, I chose a small but cozy hotel in Florida, nothing supernatural, but there was a balcony with an ocean view, and everything I could need was around: beach cafes, quiet streets for walking, the sun, which was warm even in winter. I even allowed myself to fork out for a first-class ticket, if I was going to do something for myself, then for real, because I had enough money, considering that I was no longer going to spend it on a trip in which I was initially not even allocated a seat. The next few days at work were surprisingly quiet. My family stopped calling and texting, as if they had decided that I had already resigned myself to staying at home, preparing for a long week of childcare, perhaps buying snacks, scheduling entertainment, planning walks and games. This thought made me grin as I packed light dresses, sunglasses, and a new swimsuit into my suitcase, imagining their faces at the moment when the truth would be revealed. "Are you going to warmer climes?" Janet's colleague asked, noticing how I was furtively checking the weather forecast in Florida. I shrugged, smiling. Sometimes you have to do something unexpected, I replied, and saying these words out loud was surprisingly pleasant, as if I had suddenly allowed myself to exist outside the usual framework. On the day of departure, I looked around the apartment once more, carefully examined every room, checked if everything was cleaned, if I had forgotten to turn off the lights or appliances, habitually closed the windows, made sure that the refrigerator was empty and things were laid out in their places. I did it automatically, just like I did before every family visit, only this time I won't be here when the frantic calls start, when they come to my door, expecting me, as usual, to just take their plans for granted. When the plane lifted off the ground, leaving the gray winter streets behind, I turned off my phone without hesitation and put it in my bag. No social media, no email, no family drama. Just me, the beach, and a whole week of freedom. As soon as I got out of the airport, the humid, warm Florida air enveloped me like a soft, invisible blanket, absorbing the tension of the last few days, forcing me to exhale and just let myself enjoy the moment. Tall palm trees swayed in the light wind, the air smelled of salt, the ocean was somewhere close, I could feel its presence even from this distance, and all this filled me with a strange, almost childish delight. My hotel room turned out to be even better than in the photos, spacious, bright, with a balcony that offered a breathtaking view of the endless blue, the horizon where the sky merged with the water, and that constant, rhythmic sound of waves crashing on the shore. That first day, I took off my sandals and walked barefoot through the warm, soft sand, feeling it squeeze pleasantly between my toes, and suddenly realized that I couldn't even remember the last time I had allowed myself something like this. When was the last time I did something just for myself? I swam in the hotel pool, letting the water wash away the last remnants of tension, sat with a book in my hands, reading without interference, without children's voices, without having to constantly be distracted by other people's requests. I had dinner at a small restaurant by the beach, not caring who needed to slice the food or who accidentally spilled the drink. I watched the sunset from my balcony, holding a glass of wine in my hands, for the first time in a long time not thinking about tomorrow's plans, about responsibilities, about someone else besides myself. And when my last morning in Florida came, I gave myself time to enjoy every minute of peace. I knew I'd have to turn my phone back on. I knew that I would have to face the chaos that I had left behind. But I didn't expect what I would find. As soon as the screen lit up, the phone began to vibrate continuously, bursting with a stream of messages, voice notifications, missed calls, hundreds of them, more than I've ever seen on my screen. The timestamp showed that everything had started exactly a week ago, early in the morning on the day of my departure. My fingers trembled slightly as I scrolled through the list. Sarah, where are you? Emma, Ashley, open the door. The kids are starting to worry. Michael, hi, we brought Tom and Anna, as planned. Rachel, Ashley, what's going on? Pete asks. I blinked, rereading the messages, at first not fully understanding their meaning, but then it took me only a few seconds to imagine the scene. They came to me as they were going to, expecting me, as always, to take on their responsibility, only this time the door never opened for them. And while I was reading the messages, I could perfectly imagine the scene, my sisters and cousins standing outside my empty house with 5 confused children, their suitcases already packed for a trip to the resort, tickets in their hands, and carefully thought-out plans crumbling before their eyes, falling apart like a house of cards, because the only person which they took for granted as a convenient solution turned out to be inaccessible, disappeared, leaving them alone with their own expectations. The tone of the messages changed rapidly, flowing from confusion to panic, as if each next word was spoken louder and sharper than the previous one. Ashley, this is not funny. Where are you? Pick up the phone. What should we do with the kids? You can't just disappear. But then anger came, and Sarah's messages turned into a torrent of anger that she didn't even try to contain. You're a selfish witch. How could you do this to us? Emma persisted. I can't believe you're so immature. Mom's birthday is ruined because of you. But the worst of all were the messages from my Aunt Susan, who usually stayed away and never interfered in our affairs, but now her words revealed her true attitude to the situation. "You ungrateful little trash. You've ruined everything. These kids were counting on you." I froze, reading this message over and over again, as if trying to make sure that I wasn't mistaken, that that was what she called me, that that was what they thought of me when I finally said no. Mom's messages appeared later that day, and to be honest, I even knew what she was going to write even before I saw her words on the screen. "I'm so disappointed in you, Ashley. I never thought you'd be so selfish. After all we've done for you." And then came one short message from Dad, who rarely wrote to me himself. "Your mother is crying. I hope you're happy with yourself." But the voice messages were the worst. I heard the anger, I heard the disappointment, I heard the accusations that they poured out on me, leaving no room for dialogue, as if I had done something unforgivable, as if I had not abandoned the role imposed on me, but had really betrayed them all. Even distant relatives, with whom I hadn't spoken for months, suddenly found a reason to write to me, condemning, criticizing, passing their verdict. "You've always been so reliable. How could you do this to your family? Those poor kids. You've ruined everything." I was sitting there in my peaceful hotel room, reading message after message, learning what my family really thought of me, when I stopped being their convenient solution, when I put myself first for the first time in my life. The words they used. The names they called me. The assumptions they made about my character. It was like meeting a completely different family, the one that had been hiding behind fake smiles and random requests for favors all this time, the one whose true identity only came out when I dared to say no. I packed my bags and went to the airport. It was time to go home. But I was no longer the same Ashley who had left a week ago. That Ashley might have apologized. That Ashley might have felt guilty. That Ashley might have tried to make up for her guilt in front of everyone. But that Ashley didn't exist anymore. I had just finished unpacking my suitcase, carefully putting beach clothes soaked in the smell of the ocean and salt in the closet, when I heard an aggressive, loud knock on the front door. Before I could reach the handle, I heard the key turning in the lock, and it wasn't just the sound of the door opening, it was the sound of intrusion, a sound that seemed to vibrate through the air, ruining my newly found peace. The emergency key that I gave my mother many years ago. In case I need her help. But now he wasn't being used to help, but to attack. They burst inside like an angry storm, their faces contorted with anger, their movements jerky, caught up in emotions they didn't even try to hide. Mom was walking in front, her back was straight, and her eyes were burning with such indignation that I immediately realized there would be no conversation, there would only be a trial. Sarah and Emma walked on either side, their lips pressed into thin lines, their cheeks flushed, and their hands clenched into fists, and if there were any remnants of the peace I brought with me from Florida, they evaporated in the blink of an eye. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Sarah screamed, stepping forward, and her voice rang with rage, which normally would have scared me, but this time I just calmly watched her outburst, not moving from my place. "You've ruined everything. That's it." I watched them vent their anger in my living room, the very place where I had nursed their children countless times, where I had canceled my own plans to accommodate their emergencies, where I had always been reliable, always available, always the one who sacrificed. But now they couldn't say that I was reliable. They couldn't say that I was someone they could count on. They could only scream. Mike and John refused to stay with the children. Emma spat out the words as if it were something unimaginable. And only then did it finally sink in. Their husbands, the men with whom they had formed families, refused to take care of their own children. But that didn't anger them. I was angry that I refused. They both suddenly had important things that needed urgent attention, and since no one else could or rather wanted to take responsibility, Sarah stayed at home with all 5 children while the others went to the resort to enjoy a trip that was originally supposed to be a shared family holiday, but eventually turned into a chaotic reworking of plans. She missed Mom's birthday because of you. Emma snapped, her eyes flashing. The whole trip was ruined, Mom added with a deep, theatrical sigh. No one could really enjoy their vacation, because all we did was discuss your betrayal, how you let your family down, how we had to deal with this chaos without you, how your father couldn't even ski properly because he was so upset about it all. They continued, interrupting each other, raising their voices, trying to outdo each other and expressing disappointment, indignation, anger, and the more they talked, the more absurd it all became, until something inside me broke, but not in the way they expected. I started laughing. Loud, free, almost hysterical. The sound of my laughter cut through their accusations like a knife, slicing through the air filled with tension, and instantly silenced them. They stopped in mid-sentence, staring at me with an expression of bewilderment and horror, as if I had lost my mind. What's so funny? Mom was furious, her face flushed with indignation. What could be funny in this situation? I wiped the tears from my eyes, still smiling, because if you look at it from the outside, the situation really looked ridiculous. Don't you see how absurd this is? I looked at them, trying to find some awareness on their faces. Don't you really understand how incredibly ridiculous you sound right now? Absurd? Emma's eyes narrowed. What's so absurd about that? I took a deep breath and finally stopped laughing, but my voice remained steady, firm, unshakable. You secretly planned this whole trip, I said, addressing her, but my words concerned everyone. You made a decision for me without asking me anything, you spent my money, told me to take a vacation, and all this without my participation, just assuming that I would adjust to your plans. And now that everything has fallen apart because of your erroneous assumptions, you stand here and make of I'm the villain. But you always helped before, Mom spoke in a lower voice, as if she felt awkward now, as if she doubted her rightness for the first time. Exactly, I looked at her sharply, catching this moment of hesitation. I always helped. I never said no because I didn't want to disappoint you, but instead of appreciating it, you started taking advantage of me. You stopped seeing me as a daughter, as a person, you started seeing me as a convenient, free babysitter, someone who always adapts, always sacrifices herself for others. It's not true. Sarah screamed, but there was no confidence in her voice. I raised an eyebrow, holding her gaze. Then why didn't you include me in the planning? I asked, and a tense silence fell over the room. Why didn't you ask me if I wanted to go to the resort? Why did you just assume that I'd be happy to stay with 5 kids while everyone else was having fun? I looked at their faces, hoping to see recognition, even the slightest realization, but nothing. Their expressions became cold, rigid masks. You're being selfish, Mom said softly but sharply. Her voice turned icy. You ruined my birthday. You hurt your sisters. You disappointed the children. She looked at me with such hardness that if I had been that old Ashley, I might have felt guilty. But I wasn't the old Ashley. I wasn't going to apologize anymore for not being comfortable. That's not how I raised you, Mom added, and there was a threat in her voice, a last desperate attempt to bring me back into my usual framework, into the very box from which I finally got out. But I wasn't going back. I took a step forward, calmly, without fear. Stop. She blinked, surprised by the hardness in my voice. No, Mom. I looked her straight in the eye. You're being selfish. There was silence in the room, so deep that I could hear my own breathing. This whole situation is your fault, not mine. I saw her stand up straight, her posture stiff, almost military, her face tense, and a cold fury flashed in her eyes, as if I had said something unacceptable, as if I had dared to disrupt the unshakable order of things. And then she uttered the last words that should have broken me, but instead destroyed her power over me. If that's what you think, then maybe I don't have a daughter named Ashley anymore. They were waiting for me to break down, for me to panic, for me to want to fix everything. But I didn't break down. I looked at her steadily, calmly, without emotion. "If that's what you want, Mom," I said softly but firmly, "then so be it." It's been 6 weeks since that last confrontation in my living room, 6 weeks of silence, interrupted only by occasional notifications when one of my family members made another thinly veiled post on social media, deliberately not mentioning my name, but doing everything possible so that everyone who should understand who exactly they were talking about. Speech. "Some people only think about themselves," my mother wrote last week, and dozens of comments immediately gathered under this post, full of sympathy and indignation, from relatives and family friends who only knew her version of the story. "Family should always come first," Sarah said, attaching a photo of her daughter to the post, and the text underneath was so meaningful that she didn't even need to explain who exactly she considered someone who didn't share this philosophy. Emma went even further, writing a long emotional paragraph about toxic people who destroy family ties with their selfishness, and although she never mentioned me directly, everyone knew exactly who she was referring to. A few months ago, these posts full of implicit accusations, passive aggression, and subtle jabs would have crushed me, made me doubt myself, and I would have spent hours writing mental answers, losing sleep, wondering if they were right, thinking about how I could make amends for a non-existent mistake, how to get them back. I'm sorry, but now I'm just flipping through them with a slight smile, noticing how predictable they've become, how desperate their attempts to make me look guilty look, how pathetic their confidence seems that I'll ever return to my former role. I changed my daily routine, and it turned out to be much easier than I expected. Instead of spending my weekends constantly waiting for emergency calls, which always ended with the same request, "Ashley, could you?" I joined a local book club, something I had long dreamed of, but always postponed. The first meeting seemed strange, sitting in a cozy coffee shop on a Saturday morning, discussing a book, knowing that my phone wouldn't ring, that no one would write in a panic, begging me to save the situation. I wouldn't have to rush across town, sacrificing my plans for the sake of other people's comforts. I booked another vacation last week. I'm flying to Europe in the spring. And the most amazing thing about this decision was not the trip itself, but the way I accepted it, spontaneously, without having to check anyone's schedules, without worrying about whether it would be inconvenient for someone else. I just saw a good offer and took it because I could. Sometimes, in quiet moments, I think about my nieces and nephews, and yes, I miss them, but not for how they were used against me, not for how they were turned into weapons to put pressure on my guilt, manipulate my feelings, force me to obey. I hope that someday, when they grow up, they will be able to see the whole picture, they will be able to understand what happened, they will be able to discern patterns in their own lives, learn from what I once failed to see in time, and make a different choice. I still have the emergency key, the one my mom used that last day to invade my space, to try to put me in my place, to push, humiliate, break me, and maybe I should have sent him back, made a symbolic gesture, shown that there was more between us. There are no connections, but every time I think about it, something stops me. Maybe part of me hopes that one day they'll understand. That they will see how unfairly they treated me, how they took my love for granted, that they will finally realize that family is not a chain of obligations, not sacrifices in the name of others, not endless dedication, but mutual respect, care, and acceptance, that a real family is not a requirement to give everything and the desire to share, to support, to understand. But now I'm not looking forward to that day anymore. I don't put my life on pause. I don't postpone my dreams in the hope of their forgiveness or approval. I don't try to prove my case to those who don't even want to listen. For the first time in my life, I put myself first. And it feels right. Yesterday, I deleted a family group chat from my phone, without announcements, without explanations, without dramatic messages that I was leaving. I just deleted it. One click. One light breath. One moment of relief. Another connection, severed without regrets. Some might call it selfishness. My family, no doubt, thinks so. But in recent weeks, I've finally realized one thing. There is a huge difference between selfishness and self-respect. And sometimes the most useful thing you can do is leave. Just leave. From people who see no value in you other than what you can do for them.